So today we are starting a new topic. We are going to start to look into the wonderful world of trig, and we are going to look at some of the basic ratios, or sine, cosine, and tangent ratios. Figure out what they are, figure out how to label the triangles. These are just the basics. So the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at the triangle to the right. And two words that come up quite a bit are opposite and adjacent. And we have to know what that means, where they're located. So looking at the triangle, we have to identify the leg that is adjacent and opposite to the given angle of 30. So first thing I may do is take a look at this triangle, and number one, notice it's a right triangle. Any of the trig that we are doing this year will always be in a right triangle. If it is not a right triangle, you are not doing trig. Then once I notice that, I would say, okay, across from that right angle, I know this is the hypotenuse. Hypotenuse will always be the hypotenuse. It will never change. So then once I have that labeled, I need to figure out what does adjacent and opposite mean. Okay, adjacent meaning next to. So if I'm looking at this angle, I want the side that is right next to that angle. In other words, when I trace this out, I should actually be touching that angle. So here is my adjacent side. The side opposite, if I were to trace the side, I would not come anywhere near this angle marking over here. It's directly opposite. It is a cross. That is a different word that we could use as a cross. Okay, now if we look at this next one, number 2, it's the same question, same picture, but notice what they're asking. So it says which leg is adjacent and which leg is opposite the unmarked acute angle. So they're saying this angle on the bottom. Okay, start that off the same way. First off, make sure it's a right triangle. It is. So I know that this is my hypotenuse. So now I'm looking at this angle and I am seeing this angle. When I trace that out, when I highlight that, it touches this side. So that means it has to be adjacent to this side. And then the one that it doesn't really touch, so when I trace that out, I'm not going to touch that arc that I make for that angle. I know that that has to be the opposite side. And notice that they switch. Notice that depending on the angle that you use, depends on which one is considered the opposite and which one's considered the adjacent. So it's always important to identify which angle you are using first. Okay. So if we're looking at this picture, some just basic vocab that we've gone through. The side of a right triangle opposite the right angle is called the hypotenuse. The side of a right triangle opposite the marked acute angle. Okay, so this is the side that doesn't touch that acute angle. So in this picture, here's my marked acute angle. The side that when I trace it, I'm not going to intersect that arc that I just made. That's the opposite side. And then the third side of the triangle is going to be the side that actually touches that angle. So when I trace out that side, I can actually touch that angle, go right to the vertex. That is going to be your adjacent side. So 3 vocab words we definitely need to know. Now, what in the world does sine, cosine, and tangent mean? Okay, well, they are functions of an angle, and it says it's commonly represented with the Greek letter. Looks like a big circle with a line through it. It's pronounced theta. They relate the angles of a triangle to the lengths of the sides. So the 3 basic trig ratios are sine, cosine, and tangent. So sine, the abbreviation is SIN, not sin, it's sine, sine of theta. And when we look at our triangle, our sine ratio will always be the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. So we get fractions here. Okay, your cosine theta is going to be your adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. And then our tangent ratio is going to be our opposite side divided by the adjacent side. So it's really important to know where theta is because like we saw on the front of the page, the opposite and the adjacent sides will switch, okay? And we have different ways that we can remember these ratios. Sometimes we have things like some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. A lot of times you'll hear people say SOHCAHTOA. So SOHCAHTOA. All right, telling you sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine of the angle is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent of the angle is equal to opposite over adjacent. So just different tricks that we can use to remember our ratios. Okay, so using the information, it says using this triangle pictured, we're going to identify the following. So I have sine of A. Okay, we could also say sine of theta because A and theta are the same angle right now. So sine we know is going to be our opposite side over the hypotenuse. So if I were to use letters, I could say that's going to be the ratio BC over AB. If I'm looking at cosine of A, so cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So here's my angle, here's my adjacent side, and here's the hypotenuse. So I could say that's going to be side AC over side AB. The tangent of A we have is opposite over adjacent. So here's tangent, or here's A. I need my opposite side, I need my adjacent side, so that's going to get us the ratio of BC over AC. Okay, so if we do the same thing, keeping these ratios in mind, we're going to try it with a triangle with numbers. Now, we have to pick our angle. I'm going to start with angle D. And for now, it may not be a bad idea to label it. So we know that that's always the hypotenuse. According to angle D, 1 is going to be the adjacent, and square root of 3 is your opposite. So now everything's labeled, and we can make our ratios. So the sine of D, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that's going to get us the ratio square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of D is adjacent over hypotenuse, so we get the ratio 1 over 2. And tangent of D is opposite over adjacent, so we get square root of 3 over 1. Now, notice this is going to change as soon as we get a different angle. Again, everything's going to change. The only thing that remains the same is the hypotenuse. Hypotenuse still stays hypotenuse. But now this time if I'm using angle E, square root of 3 becomes the adjacent, and 1 becomes the opposite. So notice that they flip-flop. Okay, so starting at E this time. Sine of E is opposite over adjacent. So now our opposite side is 1, and the opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is 1, and the hypotenuse doesn't change. Your hypotenuse is going to be 2. Cosine of E, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So this time at E, our adjacent side is the square root of 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Then tangent of E is opposite over adjacent. So my opposite of E is 1, the adjacent side is the square root of 3. Okay, so using these answers, it says, what do we notice about the sine of D and the cosine of E? Okay, well, sine of D, I get square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of E, I have square root of 3 over 2. So it looks like the sine of D will equal the cosine of E. Okay, so what do you notice about cosine D and sine of E? Okay, well, cosine D is 1/2, and the sine of E is also 1/2. Okay, so it looks like the cosine of D is going to equal the sine of E. Okay, one other thing we didn't notice, but take a look at your tangent ratios. Your tangents are just reciprocals of each other. So it says, do you think this will happen with all right triangles? Well, keep in mind why this is happening. When you pick a different angle, one was angle D, one was angle E, as soon as you switch the angles, the sides switch. So as soon as your sides switch, well, then your ratios are going to switch. So yes, this is always going to happen with all right triangles. So here's a yes. And our reason? Our sides will be switching. Side switch. when we change the angles. So that's our first look at trig. We're definitely going to be practicing more with it. The big thing that we need to know is one, our vocab, and two, the ratios. So we need to commit that to memory. The sooner we get that committed to memory, the easier the rest of trig will be. Okay, have a great day. Don't forget, like and subscribe.